She drove him 2 hours out of the city without telling him where they were going. Nora Whitten had been in the habit of not explaining herself to men. 16 years of running a construction empire had trained that out of her, the explaining, the softening, the prefacing every decision with an apology for having made it. She drove with both hands on the wheel, and her jaw set the way her late father had always said made her look like she was ready to fight someone. And Bernard Okafor sat in the passenger seat of her Range Rover and looked out the window at the flat Georgia highway like a man who had all the time in the world. He did not ask where they were going. That was the first thing. She had taken other men on drives before. Not this drive specifically, not to this property, but rides that were tests disguised as outings. The last man she had taken anywhere, a finance consultant named Gregory, who wore watches that cost as much as a semester of college, had spent the first 20 minutes complimenting the car, the stitching on the seats, the way the navigation system anticipated turns. He had run his hand along the dashboard like he was appraising it. She had turned around 40 minutes in and never called him again. Bernard looked out the window. At one point, somewhere past the county line where the oak trees thickened on both sides of the road, he said, "You grew up near water." She glanced at him. "What? The way you drive. You don't tense up on curves. People who grew up near water drive like that. Like they're used to things bending." She said, "I grew up in Macon." He nodded like that answered something and went back to the window. Nora Whitten was 44 years old and had built Whitten Construction from a 2-man drywall operation. Her father left her into a company with 47 employees and contracts across 3 states. She had a daughter in college in Oregon and a house in Buckhead that she rattled around in on weeknights, and a reputation in the industry for being the kind of woman you did not want to negotiate against because she had already thought of your argument before you opened your mouth. She had also been alone for 11 years, since her divorce from a man who had called himself a partner, right up until the moment the company became worth something, at which point he had become a man who called himself underpaid. She was not bitter about it. She had made a decision after the divorce, the way you make decisions after a car accident, that she would be more careful about what she let get close to her. Bernard Okafor was 41. He worked as a structural inspector for the county, the man who came to job sites and told contractors what was wrong with their footings. He had a son named Marcus who was 7, and he picked the boy up from school every day at 3:15 and made dinner every night and did homework at the kitchen table with the seriousness of a man who understood that he was the only thing standing between his child and a world that would not slow down for him. His wife had left 3 years ago, not left him for someone else, just left the way some people leave when they realize the life they're living is not the life they meant to have. She lived in Phoenix now. She called Marcus on birthdays. Nora had met Bernard 8 weeks ago when he showed up to flag a concrete pour on one of her sites and told her foreman that the rebar spacing was wrong. Her foreman had called her annoyed, and she had driven over expecting to argue, and instead she had stood next to this man in a hard hat while he showed her, calmly and without condescension, exactly where the error was and what it would cost them down the road if they didn't correct it. He had been right. She had known he was right before he finished the sentence. She had called the county office the next morning under the pretense of a follow-up question. They had talked for 40 minutes. That had been 8 weeks ago, and she still had not told anyone about him. Not her business partner, Claudette, not her daughter, not her friend Rochelle, who would have had opinions. There was something about saying it out loud that felt like setting it down somewhere it could be broken. The property appeared on the left side of the road without warning, the way old things do, a rusted gate half open and a gravel path leading through overgrown grass toward a structure that had once been a farmhouse. Nora turned in without signaling. The tires crunched. The farmhouse sat at the end of the path like something that had given up on being found. Bernard looked at it. "Mine," she said, "since 2019. I bought it at auction." He got out of the car when she did, which she noticed because Gregory had waited in the car, the first time she brought him anywhere even slightly inconvenient, sat there with the engine running to keep the air conditioning on. The porch boards were soft in 2 places. She knew which ones. She stepped around them. Bernard stepped around them without her saying anything. She watched him look at the boards first before he put his weight down, the habit of a man who inspects things for a living. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and something faintly mineral, the smell of places that have been shut for a long time. There was furniture under drop cloths, a staircase with a broken banister, afternoon light coming through windows that were intact on this side and gone on the other. She watched him take it in. He walked to the east wall and put his hand on it, not casually, the way you touch a wall to feel what it's made of. He pressed his palm flat. He knocked twice, listening. "Load-bearing," he said. "You'd need to sister the joists on the second floor before you do anything else." "I know." The foundation's poured concrete. Older, but solid. He crouched down and looked along the baseboard. "No settlement cracking. Someone built this right the first time," she said. "I've had 2 architects out here. They both told me to tear it down." He straightened up and looked at her with an expression she had seen on him once before on the job site the day they met. Not disagreement, exactly. More like a man who has heard an opinion he finds insufficient. "They were wrong," he said. "Why? Because tearing something down is faster. Doesn't make it right." He looked back at the wall. "A broken thing can still be worth the work of putting back together. Depends on whether the bones are good. This one's bones are good." Nora stood very still. She had not told him why she brought him here. She had framed it as a second opinion, professional. She had a project she was considering and wanted a structural eye on it before she committed. That was true as far as it went. It was also not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she had been watching him for 8 weeks, the way she watched everything she was considering investing in, carefully and from a slight distance, and she had not been able to find the thing she was looking for. The calculation. The angle. The moment when his attention shifted from her to what she represented. It had not come, and she had told herself that wasn't enough, that anyone could be patient, that Gregory had been patient too for a while. So she had brought him here, to this house, to this land that had appreciated to somewhere north of $3 million, even in its current condition, which she had mentioned on the drive, the land value, watching his face the way she had watched every face for 11 years. He had not reacted. He had said, the way you say it when something is interesting, but doesn't change what you were thinking about. They walked through the rest of the house, the kitchen with its water-stained ceiling, the back bedroom where the window had been boarded from outside, the room at the top of the stairs that still had a child's height marks penciled on the door frame, names she didn't know, dates going back to 1987. Bernard photographed the marks on his phone without comment. "For Marcus," he said, seeing her expression. "He likes old things." She did not know what to do with that. She filed it away. On the way back down the stairs, she misjudged the second step, the one that dipped, and she put her hand out, and he was already there, not catching her dramatically. Just a hand at her elbow, steady the way you steady someone without making a production of it, and then he let go when she had her footing. "Thank you," she said. "Sure." She stood there for a moment on the stairs, looking at the entry hall below, and she felt something move in her chest that she did not have a name for, something that felt uncomfortably like being seen. They ate lunch at a diner outside of town, the kind of place with laminated menus and sweet tea that came without being asked. Bernard ordered a patty melt. He ate it without making conversation about the food, which she appreciated because she had spent enough business dinners with men who narrated their meals to understand that food commentary was often a form of filling silence that had made them nervous. Bernard was not nervous. She was. She did not show it. She had not shown nerves in a business context since her late 30s, had trained herself out of it the way you train yourself out of any habit that costs you. But this was not a business context, or it wasn't only that, and underneath the studied calm she was aware of her own pulse in a way that annoyed her. He talked about Marcus over lunch, not the way divorced fathers sometimes talked about their children, performing devotion for an audience, but the way you talk about someone you have thought about all morning. He said that Marcus had recently become interested in bridges, not how they looked but how they worked, the engineering of them, and that they had been watching YouTube videos together about suspension cables, and Bernard was learning alongside him, which he said with a kind of pleasure that had nothing self-congratulatory in it. She asked, "How long has he been interested in that?" "Since February. Before that it was weather systems." He paused. The month before that, ancient Egypt. We have a phase. She laughed. It came out before she decided to let it. He looked at her when she laughed, not with surprise. With something quieter than that, she looked away first. On the drive back, an hour out of the city, her phone lit up on the center console. She had set up the alert herself. She did it with every man she got close enough to care about, had set it up after Gregory, after the pattern became clear to her. A mutual contact, someone with access to financial search tools, who would send her a notification when someone ran her name through a certain kind of database. The kind of search you ran when you were trying to find out what someone was worth. The notification read, "No new searches in past 30 days." She turned the screen face down. Bernard was watching the trees. She had told herself when she set up the system that it was just information. That information was neutral. That anyone who ran the search wasn't automatically disqualified. That maybe they were just curious. That it didn't necessarily mean what she feared it meant. She had told herself that. She had also turned around and gone home the last 2 times the alert fired. He asked her, somewhere near the highway interchange, if Marcus could come to the property someday, just to see the height marks. He would not touch anything, Bernard said. He just thought the boy would find it interesting, the idea that other children had stood in that same room a long time ago and measured themselves against a door frame. She said yes before she had finished thinking about it. That was the second thing. 3 weeks later, she found the camera. It was not her camera. She had been in the farmhouse herself, alone, doing a second walkthrough before she committed to the renovation contractor she had finally selected. And she found it in the upper corner of the living room, small, wireless, the kind a person put up to monitor a property remotely. She knew what it was immediately. She had specified this equipment for 2 of her commercial sites. She stood in the living room for a long time. Then she found the second one, in the kitchen, angled toward the door. She drove home and she sat at her kitchen table and she did not cry. She had not cried about a man since her divorce, and she had decided after that she was done with it, not because crying was weakness, but because it was an expense she could not keep affording. She sat at the table and she turned her phone over in her hands and she thought about every conversation she had replayed since the diner, every moment she had allowed herself to think, maybe, and she felt the old familiar closing, the walls going up the way they had learned to go up, fast and without ceremony. She called Bernard. He answered on the second ring. "I found the cameras," she said, "in the farmhouse." Silence. Not the silence of a man caught. The silence of a man trying to understand what he had just heard. He said, "What cameras?" "2 of them. Wireless. One in the living room, one in the kitchen." Another silence. Then, "Nora, I did not put cameras in your property. They weren't there when I bought it. I hear you. I'm telling you I didn't put them there," she said. "Then who did? I don't know. But I can help you find out if you want." He paused. "Or you can tell me you believe I did it and I'll respect that. I won't try to talk you out of what you've already decided." She said nothing. He said, "You've already decided," she said. "I don't know what I've decided." That was more honest than she had meant to be. She heard him breathe. Then he said, "I'm going to say something and I need you to hear it like a person and not like a CEO." She said, "All right. I know what I look like to you. I know what category you put men in when you meet them, and I know I didn't come with the kind of proof that gets a person moved out of that category. I understand why you built the system you built. I'm not angry about it." He stopped. "But I need you to know that I have been exactly who I showed you. Every conversation, every lunch, the day at the farmhouse. That was me, not a strategy. Me." She pressed her free hand flat on the table. He said, "The cameras aren't mine. I'll take a polygraph if that's what it takes. But I want you to think about something before you hang up. What? You brought me to that property to test me. I knew that. I knew it before we got out of the car. I didn't say anything because I understood it, and because I thought you deserved to see what you needed to see without me making it about that." He paused. "I passed whatever test you set up. The cameras aren't part of it, and I'm still here." She sat in her kitchen for a long time after she hung up. She called her security contractor that evening. He found the camera's registration ID within 2 days. They traced back to a property management firm she had dismissed 8 months ago, a former business partner who had retained access to the property address from when they had evaluated it together. It had nothing to do with Bernard. It had to do with corporate surveillance in an ongoing contractual dispute that her attorney was now handling. She called Bernard and told him this. He said, "Okay." She said, "I owe you an apology." He said, "You owe me an explanation of why you thought I was capable of it." "But not yet. When you're ready." She drove to his apartment on a Tuesday evening without calling first. She stood outside the door and she heard the television and then the lower sound of a child asking a question, and she stood there for a long time before she knocked. Bernard opened the door with Marcus at his side, a boy with his father's same unhurried eyes. Marcus looked at her and said, "Are you the lady who has the house with the door marks?" She said. "Yes." He said, "Dad showed me the picture," I counted. There were 9 kids. Over 20 years. He considered this with the seriousness of a 7-year-old processing an important fact. "That's a lot of growing," Bernard said. "Marcus," the boy said. "What?" "It is." Nora looked at Bernard over the boy's head. He was watching her with that expression she had come to recognize, the one that was not waiting for anything, not performing anything, not calculating the angle, just present, just there. She said, "I'm sorry, for the phone call, for the way I said it." He held the door open wider and said, "You want to come in? We're watching something about the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It's more interesting than it sounds." She stepped inside. Marcus immediately went back to the couch and pulled a blanket over his feet and resumed watching the television with the focused attention of a child who has temporarily conceded to the presence of an adult but intends to reclaim the evening shortly. Nora sat on the edge of the armchair. Bernard sat on the couch next to his son. The footage on the screen showed an old bridge oscillating, twisting on itself in the wind, and a narrator explained in a measured voice that engineers had not accounted for resonance, for the frequency at which the wind would find the bridge's own natural rhythm and amplify it until the whole structure failed. Marcus said, "See, it's not that the bridge was weak. It just didn't know what it was doing to itself." Bernard glanced at her. She looked at the screen. She stayed for 2 hours. 6 weeks later, Nora signed the renovation contract for the farmhouse. She had made one change to the original plans. Instead of converting the upper bedroom to a home office, she was keeping it a bedroom. The door frame with the height marks was being preserved under a clear protective coat. A carpenter Bernard knew was reinforcing the frame without disturbing the pencil lines. The farmhouse sat at the end of its gravel drive in November light and looked from a certain angle on a certain afternoon, like something that had not given up after all, just waited. Bernard stood next to her in the overgrown grass and looked at it and did not say anything for a while. Then he said the bones were always good. She knew he was not only talking about the house. She had built walls for 11 years, and she had been right to build them, and she knew that too. Some things needed protecting while they were still being built. The question had never been whether to build the walls. The question had always been whether she would know, when the time came, how to put in a door. She looked at the farmhouse. She looked at the man standing next to her, who had not asked her for anything, who had shown up to a job site and told the truth about bad rebar, and then answered the phone on the second ring, and then held the door open on a Tuesday night without making a production of any of it. She said, "Marcus measured himself on the frame last week." Bernard said, "I know. He told me. Said he was going to measure every 6 months and keep track. I told him he could." Bernard looked at her. "I know that too. He told me that part also." She said, "He's going to be tall." "Yeah," Bernard said. "He is." The wind moved through the grass around the house, and the afternoon held still for a moment the way afternoons sometimes do when something has shifted without announcing itself, and Nora Whitten stood in the middle of it and let herself feel the full weight of the fact that she was not alone. It was, she decided, a thing worth the work of getting used to. If you made it all the way here with me, thank you for that. I want to ask you something honestly. If someone tested you the way Nora tested Bernard, and you found out later that they'd been watching, waiting for you to make the wrong move, could you forgive them? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.